Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is not a crisis of values. It's a crisis of confidence that has set in at exactly the same time that we face existential threats. On the left, this self-doubt manifests as an embarrassment of the West's legacy, and in extremis, a hatred of Western history and even its culture.
Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch, there speaking at the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship conference in London. It's been dubbed an all-right haven, but what's really going on?
Hello, you're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Lizzy Burden.
And I'm Yuan Potts. Welcome to the programme. Now, London's Excel Centre's played host to Olympic athletes and stars of stage and screen in the past. But this week, headliners at the venue include Michael Gove and Jordan Peterson. The Alliance for Responsible Citizenship is holding its 2025 conference there. It's more interesting than it sounds, and it certainly has an all-star speaker list.
Yeah, the conference has drawn together 4,000 people to discuss no less than the relaying the foundations of our civilisation at a price of a sweet £1,500 a ticket. Now, the organisers promised to interrogate some of the most important social, economic, cultural and moral questions of the day. So, some pretty lofty ambitions, Yuan.
Yeah, I guess figures from what you would call broadly the right are convening at the centre, including former Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott and Reform UK leader Nigel Farage. But I guess the question is, what's bringing all these figures together, and crucially, why now? Yeah,
it seems there's someone from almost every walk of life, from Catholic bishops to scientists. And what's striking is it's not just another political conference. Rather than a party being promoted, there is a focus on ideas and values. And as Nigel Farage put it in his speech, the Judeo-Christian cultural underpinnings that the West has, as he says, lost sight of. So is this the political umbrella permitting Kemi Badenoch to group British Conservatives and MAGA Republicans, Make America Great Again Republicans from Donald Trump's camp? And what does its emergence mean for the future?
Bloomberg's Daniel Zuidijk can help us with all of this. He's been to the event. Now, Daniel, just tell us what the atmosphere was like there.
Broadly speaking, I would describe it not as the alt-right gathering that some elements of the British press have termed it, but rather, you know, to borrow a phrase being used by attendees at the conference, an anti-Davos. It is a coalition of various disparate interests who have perspectives on things such as, you know, net zero, immigration, free trade that do differ, but, you know, are broadly united under the idea perhaps maybe we shouldn't transition just as quickly, or if at all. Maybe immigration should be limited to certain countries that agree with our broad goals. Yes, it is a somewhat alien idea within the British political tradition, but elsewhere in the world, all of this stuff has been pretty normalised for a while now.
So if this is anti-Davos, what was the crowd like? Is it the opposite of male, rich and white?
Oh, no, I mean, it's still male, rich and white, broadly speaking. But, you know, as a long-time observer of the online right, for example, there are a number of, like, younger faces that I recognise. There are faces there from Gamergate, the pro-natalist influencer movements, you know, a lot of people who would who describe themselves as, quote-unquote, the based rights, were in attendance, if not, you know, immediately invited to speak. But, you know, I also saw many more traditional figures. Liz Truss was there, Lord Frost, the Brexit negotiator. Michael Gove was indeed, you know, both doing the rounds to both various booths and at, you know, a debate about free trade yesterday.
That's interesting. I remember at Tory party conference, Liz Truss had a queue round the corner to hear her speak. Was she getting the, you know, rock star treatment again here? Yeah,
I think so. I think this is very much her people, like, that are here. Like, the broad... They very much buy into her idea, and this idea that is, you know, taken hold more broadly amongst the right of conservatism, that the West is, quote unquote, under threat. What that threat is specifically is still a matter of debate, but it's been interesting to hear their various interpretations.
How has it all come about? Talking about relaying the foundations of our civilization, I mean, that's quite something, isn't it? But is there anything that sort of unites these people? It sounds like quite a sort of disparate grouping. Clearly it's a grouping of people on the right, isn't it? But other than that, is there anything that sort of brings them together?
So they are united under very broad goals. So, like, you know, after J.D. Vance's speech at Munich last week, a lot of attendees have spoken to me about the evils of social media, what they dub as social media censorship. That is, any and all efforts to moderate content online. That includes both, you know, fact checkers, USAID efforts to fund independent media, as well as the DSA here in Europe. But beyond that, not really.
You mentioned the Munich Security Conference. What about the view on Russia? Because it's interesting if you've got the sort of MAGA conservatives, when you've had Donald Trump meeting Marco Rubio, meeting top Russian officials in Riyadh to talk about the end of the war in Ukraine, and that kind of warmth, it seems, building towards Russia, and contrast that with the likes of Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, who were so pro-Ukraine. Isn't that a split dividing in the right between Europe and US?
So that's been the interesting thing about this conference. Discussions about recent current events have been broadly absent. Instead, people have, as the organisers state, have been limiting their talking points to these broad goals. Even, Peter Thiel, when he appeared via video link on Monday, spent a long part of his session talking about Cartesian logic. Did I exactly follow it? No, but, there you go. The one exception to that is this argument that's emerging from the US that they shouldn't be the guarantors of European security. That has received some traction here, but again, not really.
Sounds like there are some elephants in the room.
A little bit, you could say that.
Really interesting that there's this focus on religion. A number of figures from the field of divinity present. The Catholic bishop, the head of the UK's Coptic Orthodox Church. Now, if this had been an American conference, this would sort of be unsurprising. But in the UK, religion and politics sort of rarely mix. Just talk to us about the religious element of this.
It is an incredibly striking element of both the content of the main talks as well as the conference floor itself. It is there was this incredibly religious idea. Indeed, a number of the attendees have been somewhat surprised to encounter something like this in the UK. Whether this is going to be a one-off or it's a function of the personal beliefs of the organisers, I haven't exactly been able to work out yet. But yeah, no, I would agree that it is generally quite spiritual.
When you've got so much electoral upheaval, shall we say, around the world, do you think that there is going to be a lasting alliance of the right across countries?
I think there has been a general coming together of the right across countries since the pandemic. I think ARC, rather than the beginning of some kind of alliance, is just the latest manifestation of that. People that I talk to were meeting old friends and talking to old contacts and, yes, there were congressmen talking to, pro-family organizations in Eastern Europe for the first time, but there were also influencers from across the world having informal, side gatherings that, how they described it to me, wasn't for the first time.
So in the conversations on the sidelines, if not on the main stage, do you get the sense that Kemi Badenoch is going to try to have a close relationship with Donald Trump in a contrast to Keir Starmer, who's perhaps trying to ignore him somewhat?
So I think the general sense I've got from the Americans in the room, in attendance, and indeed the president of the Heritage Foundation, a Washington, D.C.-based think tank, said this explicitly on a call yesterday, that they are there for any and all groups that support their goals. So if Kemi Badenoch can fall in line with this MAGA vision of conservatism, then sure. But I'm not quite sure that they view her as hardline enough.
That's interesting. Clearly, there's a conservative revolution taking place in America right now. I'm sure that was a big talking point at the conference. Do you get the sense that Brits want to learn from Trump and MAGA and what the Republican Party have done?
Incredibly, to go back to your question about atmosphere, there was this air of excitement in the room. There was very much this view that Donald Trump's victory has opened the doors to a lot of, what we would have once deemed fringe ideas to come into the mainstream of European politics.
Yeah, this idea from Nigel Farage that we should be having more babies in the UK at the same time as he's saying there should be less immigration. How does that add up? Did you get more fleshing out of this logic in the room?
I mean, fleshing out might be a stretch, but it's a hard thing to describe because I myself don't quite get it and haven't had a satisfactory explanation from anybody. But yeah, the broad-based idea around this move is that through policy alignment, incentives, and general coercion, we can sort of get native Europeans, and I'm doing air quotes for anybody who's listening to this by audio, to have more babies and opposed to importing more people from elsewhere in the world.
Despite all the pressure on services that we already have.
I mean, a lot of that is kind of just talked over. You know, you can take the short-term harm, and
maybe it's to counter the ageing population.
I think that is generally what they're thinking. But I think when I mention the fact that to get back to the 2.5 replacement birth rate that a lot of these people want, it would take maybe a generation. A lot of those people kind of skip over the finer details. It's for someone else. It's for somebody else to think about.
I'm interested that you mentioned about Kemi Badenoch. Clearly, there are lots of conservatives, capital C conservatives, in attendance. Is it your impression that most people at the conference, or a lot of people at the conference, feel that Reform UK is now their vehicle in the UK? How were conservatives, capital C conservatives, sort of being treated?
Yes, definitely. Outside of figures such as Liz Truss, there's broad disappointment with the capital C Conservative Party here in the UK. They view them as, closet liberals, quote unquote, like fakes, someone who a group that essentially failed to sort of live up to the promises that they made at the various elections that they won. Whether Reform can do that was also an open question. There's some hope, but I think the thing to understand about the event as a whole is the UK didn't figure into it as much as we here in London would like to think. There was some consideration towards it, but, it was present only to the extent that the event was being held in London. If this had been held in Brussels or Berlin or somewhere else, I don't think, it would have got nearly as much attention.
I suppose for all the negative headlines about Keir Starmer, he has got that stonking majority, so an election will be a long way off. Dan, it's been really great to talk to you. Daniel Zuidijk of Bloomberg News team. We thank you so much for joining us. But that's it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe and give it 5 stars so other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. This episode was produced by Tiwa Adebayo and our audio engineer was Sean Guastamakia. I'm Yuan Potts. And I'm Lizzy Burden. We'll be back with more tomorrow. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.